They called it a meeting, but it was more like a quiet execution. A black entrepreneur sitting across from polished smiles that measured his worth in stereotypes and found him lacking. Behind their polite words lurked mockery, a calculated refusal dressed as business sense, the unspoken rule that people like him should know their place. What they never expected was that their casual cruelty would spark the very thing they tried to kill. A plan big enough to bury their reputations, an investment so massive it would reshape the city and leave them scrambling to explain how they lost it all. This is the story of how one man turned their condescension into his greatest weapon. Stick around. Hit like and subscribe if you want to follow the twist to the end, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts or where you're watching from. I want to know what you think about this fight for respect. Langston Pryor pushed open the tall glass doors of Hawthorne and Chase Bank, trying to keep his nerves steady. He had rehearsed every line of his pitch, visualized every question and answer, and chosen his best Navy suit to project quiet authority. Today was supposed to be the breakthrough. He crossed the cool marble lobby, past towering potted plants and the bank's ostentatious slogan etched in brass, building communities through investment. He paused at the polished reception counter, forcing a pleasant smile. "Good morning," he said evenly. "Langston Pryor. I have a meeting with Mr. Kincaid." The receptionist didn't return his smile. Her eyes flicked to her monitor, nails tapping keys without urgency. She didn't say good morning back. She just muttered, "Have a seat. He knows you're here." Langston hesitated. He'd been early on purpose to show respect. He adjusted the slim black folder under his arm and walked to the waiting area. He sat in the black leather chair, back rigid, watching the lobby fill and empty with briskly greeted clients. 10 minutes, then 20. He shifted in his seat, fighting irritation. 2 men in tailored suits were ushered in immediately with hearty handshakes. A woman in designer heels was personally escorted back by the assistant branch manager, her laughter ringing out as they disappeared behind the frosted glass doors. 30 minutes. Langston pressed his lips together, checking his watch. 45 minutes. He felt heat crawling up his neck. He cleared his throat, trying to catch the receptionist's eye. She pretended not to see him. When he finally stood to speak, she sighed audibly. "Yes." Her voice was clipped. "I've been waiting nearly an hour," he said with strained calm. "Can you please confirm Mr. Kincaid is aware I'm here?" She didn't bother hiding her annoyance. "He's aware. He'll see you when he's free. Sit down." He did. He clenched the folder tighter, careful not to crush the edges. 50 minutes crawled by. Finally, the door swung open and Warren Kincaid appeared, flanked by 2 colleagues in expensive suits. He was tall, broad-chested, with slick back hair and a smug, practiced smile. He didn't immediately look at Langston. Instead, he finished his joke with his colleagues, loud enough for the lobby to hear, eliciting hearty laughter. Then he let his eyes slide lazily over to Langston. Well, look who it is." Warren boomed theatrically. "My man Langston." He pronounced it wrong, stretching it deliberately. "Langston." Langston rose stiffly. "Langston," he corrected quietly. Warren clapped him on the shoulder with exaggerated friendliness, leaning in too close. Sure. Come on, son. Let's hear about this big plan of yours." "Son." He said it loud enough that the entire lobby heard it. Langston felt eyes on him, clients, tellers, the receptionist smirking. He fought the urge to step back or slap the man's hand off his shoulder. He bit the inside of his cheek, tasting metal, and forced himself to follow. Warren didn't wait. He turned on his heel, leaving Langston to hurry behind him like a child being dragged to the principal's office. The executive suite was silent and sterile. Warren's office was designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished steel desk, muted artwork. Warren didn't offer him coffee or water. He didn't even sit up properly. He lounged back in his chair, gesturing lazily at the opposite seat. "Have a seat, son," he drawled, smirking. Langston sat, careful not to slam the folder on the desk, even though he wanted to. He opened it slowly, revealing the sleekly printed executive summary. He cleared his throat, voice calm despite his racing pulse. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Kincaid. This proposal details a phased urban redevelopment initiative. Phase 1 requires $8 million in seed funding, with projections for double-digit ROI by year 3. We've got preliminary commitments from local businesses and nonprofits, and we're coordinating with the city council. Warren snorted. Actually snorted. He turned to his junior banker, who was pretending to take notes. $8 million. He arrived early again, this time determined to be even more polite, more precise. He wore the same navy suit. The receptionist didn't bother greeting him by name. She just waved him to the chairs and said nothing else. He sat stiffly, watching other clients get their handshakes, their smiles. When Warren emerged at last, he didn't even pretend to be friendly. "Langston," he called in a bored voice. "Let's see what you've got." Again. Langston stood, tightening his grip on the folder, and followed him. This time Warren's office had another man in it, a junior banker with thin hair and anxious eyes. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't speak at all, just opened a notebook and waited. Langston sat down carefully. He opened the folder, hands steady despite the tremor he felt inside. "Thank you for seeing me again," he began, his voice firm. "I'd like to walk through the revenue projections in more detail. This model shows conservative estimates for the commercial tenants and outlines the mixed-use revenue plan, along with tax incentives negotiated through the city council." Warren didn't even look at the numbers. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, watching Langston like he was a mildly amusing street act. Langston pressed on, determined to maintain control. If you look at page 5, you'll see the Phase 1 breakdown, including green energy retrofits. These will reduce long-term costs, improving ROI and making the project attractive for ESG funds. Warren interrupted with a bark of laughter that seemed to shake the glass in the windows. Hold on. He smirked at his junior banker. "You hearing this? ESG funds. Green energy retrofits. Son, do you really think investors want to back a corner store idea just because you slapped sustainable on it?" Langston felt heat crawl up his neck. He opened his mouth to answer, but Warren kept talking over him. "Listen, I know you probably practice this in front of the mirror. It's cute, really, but this isn't Shark Tank. This is a bank. A real bank." Langston tried again, voice cracking slightly despite his best efforts. "If you'll let me finish, you'll see the partners we're working with already have commitments, pending final financing." Warren held up a hand dramatically, like a stage actor calling for silence. He leaned forward with exaggerated interest, eyebrows raised. "Commitments? Oh, sure. Let me guess. Some neighborhood barbershop said they'd pitch in $500. He snorted, shaking his head. "Tell me this isn't the most local pipe dream you've ever heard." The junior banker actually laughed then, a nervous, high-pitched giggle that died quickly when he saw Langston's expression. Langston shut the folder slowly, deliberately, refusing to slam it even though his heart was hammering with rage and embarrassment. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice level. "Mr. Kincaid, these are real commitments from businesses and nonprofits with track records in urban redevelopment." Warren just grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Right. Sure. And I'm the tooth fairy. Look, this isn't charity. This isn't some local bake sale. We're not about to flush real money down the toilet on some feel-good vanity project because you can recite the buzzwords." Langston closed his eyes for a second, feeling everything in him tighten. He thought about his father working double shifts to get him through grad school, about the business owners who'd sat in community meetings for hours helping him draft this plan, about the young people he'd promised real jobs. He felt his throat close. He wanted to shout, to stand up, to walk out and slam the door so hard the glass shattered. But he didn't. He opened his eyes and nodded once, voice hoarse. "I understand." She pointed silently to the same chair he'd sat in before. Langston sat, back straight, eyes fixed on the big brass sign promising investment in community. He watched other clients be greeted with warmth, escorted with smiles through the frosted doors. He sat there for 30 minutes before Warren finally emerged, wearing that same patronizing smirk, checking his watch with exaggerated disapproval. "Langston," he called out deliberately. "Come on, son. Follow me." Langston stood, without a word, jaw tight. But Warren didn't lead him to the gleaming executive conference room where other clients had met. Instead, he gestured to a narrow side hallway and pushed open a small door. "In here," he said flatly. Langston hesitated. The room was tiny and windowless, with buzzing fluorescent lights, one of which flickered constantly. A cheap plastic table sat off-center, with two mismatched chairs on either side. A maintenance cart sat in the corner, partially hidden by a stained curtain. Langston looked at it, then at Warren, but said nothing. He walked in and sat slowly, the chair wobbling slightly under him. Warren entered, leaving the door ajar, as if to broadcast there was no reason to give Langston any privacy. He didn't sit at first. He simply leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Langston with that same amused, predatory expression. Langston cleared his throat, opening the folder with care despite how tight his fingers felt. "Thank you for meeting with me again," he began, voice low but steady. "I've revised the plan based on your feedback. The Phase 1 funding request is now $7 million even, with secured matching funds from partner organizations. I've added a section on risk mitigation, including pre-approved tax credits and construction bids from licensed contractors." Warren didn't move. He didn't even look at the papers. He just stared, eyebrows slightly raised in mock surprise. When Langston finished describing the new model, Warren let out a single, theatrical laugh, shaking his head. "Look at you," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "So polite, so serious, trying so hard." He finally sat in the opposite chair with a groan, leaning forward and sliding the folder back across the table with one finger. He hadn't even opened it. "Son," he said, drawing the word out, "this belongs at a charity bake sale, not a bank." Langston's chest tightened, but he forced himself to ask, "Did you even want to see the new numbers?" Warren smirked. "Oh, I'm sure they're cute. Very impressive. Charts and colors and little community letters of support. Maybe you can hand them out at the next neighborhood festival." Langston tried to answer, but his voice caught in his throat. He felt the words choke. He swallowed, but his mouth was dry. Warren continued, his voice rising so anyone walking by could hear. "Let me make this clear so you don't waste any more of my time, or yours. We don't do loans for local pet projects. We don't bankroll warm and fuzzy social experiments. We make money, real money, for real investors." When he tried to apply again to Hawthorne and Chase using their online small business portal, just in case, it was rejected in hours. No explanation. When he tried calling the branch to ask about the rejection, the frontline rep wouldn't answer his questions. She transferred him 3 times before finally hanging up. He tried emailing Warren directly. He kept it professional, polite, practically begging. "If there's any way I can revise the proposal to meet your requirements, I'd welcome the chance to discuss it." Warren's only response was one line, sent back with shocking speed. "I'd focus on more realistic goals if I were you." It didn't even have a greeting or a signature. Langston felt sick. He knew something was off. His plan was strong. He had actual partners lined up, preliminary agreements with local businesses, architects, even the city council's interest. But it was like a wall had gone up around the entire industry. Weeks passed, and everywhere he turned he felt doors slamming shut before he even knocked. What Langston didn't know, but would learn much later, was that Warren Kincaid hadn't just rejected him to his face. Warren had gone further. In the bank's internal loan management system, there was a field for risk flags. Warren had personally entered Langston's business name with a code High Risk Urban Exposure, a term that didn't even exist in the official guidelines. The note ensured that any underwriter or committee member who reviewed Langston's application would see a bright red warning and skip straight to denial. It wasn't just about this one loan. It blackballed Langston for any future credit with the bank. But Warren hadn't stopped there. Confident and unrepentant, he'd even bragged about it in an email chain to other senior bankers. He wrote, "Just did us all a favor. Flagged the latest local hero project as high risk. Not about to let us get shamed into adding that kind of flavor to the serious portfolio." He didn't even bother using coded language by the end. He seemed to enjoy it, the way you'd enjoy stomping on a bug. "Better to kill it early than let it waste committee time," he'd added. with a winking emoji that felt like a knife twist when Langston would eventually see it. Langston didn't know about those emails yet. All he knew was the rejection letters were piling up. Calls went unanswered. Promises for callbacks evaporated. Some of his local partners started getting nervous. He could see it in their eyes during meetings, their faith in him slipping. They were polite about it, of course. They said things like, maybe we should look at other options, or is there any progress with financing? But the subtext was clear. He was failing them. He worked longer hours, barely sleeping, reworking budgets, slicing his own salary to nothing, trying to make the numbers work with smaller and smaller funding targets. But it didn't matter. He didn't know why he couldn't get even a fraction of what he needed. He started to wonder if it really was his fault, if maybe he was in over his head. His confidence, always fragile beneath the polished professional surface, cracked a little more each day. Warren, meanwhile, felt no guilt at all. If anything, he enjoyed recounting it at expensive lunches with colleagues, spinning it as good, hard-nosed banking. He told one executive from another department, "Kid came in with his sad community plan like he was on Sesame Street. Can you imagine me trying to sell that crap to the committee? I'd get laughed out of the room. I flagged him so no one else would waste time." He chuckled at his own cleverness. "You're welcome." The other man laughed too. He still worked the same long hours at the folding table that served as his desk, scrawling numbers on legal pads until his hands cramped, revising cost models that no one would read. He was exhausted, strung out, and haunted by the memory of Warren Kincaid's voice calling him son, by the emails that had answered him with nothing but condescension. But even that wasn't the worst. He didn't know how much worse it could get until he forced himself to attend the city's annual Small Business and Development Networking Gala. It was the kind of event he'd once dreamed of working. Neat name tags, local officials, wealthy investors, all clinking glasses of wine beneath chandeliers while trading cards and promises. He told himself he couldn't skip it. It was his last chance to find someone willing to fund the vision. He'd even managed to get a discounted ticket through a sponsor who believed in him. He wore his best suit again, the one that had grown stiff from too many dry cleanings. He rehearsed every talking point in the mirror that morning, willing himself to appear calm, credible, unstoppable. When he walked in, he felt every gaze pass over him, polite but distant. He recognized Warren Kincaid immediately, standing near the bar in a tight circle of bank execs and investors, laughing too loudly. Warren's face was red with amusement, a glass of scotch in one hand. Langston tried to steer clear at first, sticking to the quiet edges of the room, but he could feel Warren's eyes on him, predatory and cold. When their gazes finally met, Warren smiled wide and waved him over with mock friendliness. Langston hesitated. He thought about turning away, about leaving right then. But he couldn't. He couldn't show weakness, not there. He forced himself forward, step by painful step, feeling the carpet drag against his shoes like wet concrete. As soon as he was in earshot, Warren turned back to his circle and said in an exaggerated voice meant for everyone around them to hear, "Gentlemen, this is Langston Pryor. He's got the next big thing going, right? Big dreams for the next great. What is it again? A strip mall? Soup kitchen? Help me out here." The men around him chuckled, polite but uneasy, glancing at Langston with pity or embarrassment or both. Langston's mouth went dry. He tried to answer, but Warren didn't give him the chance. He continued, swirling his drink. "We don't have time for social justice startups, Langston. You know that. Serious investors don't throw money into those charity holes." Langston felt his face go hot. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, to outline every metric and projection he'd worked himself raw to perfect. But the words died in his throat. The circle had already started to close, turning away from him politely, shutting him out of the conversation without actually saying it. Someone coughed. Another man checked his watch and murmured about the hors d'oeuvres. Warren gave him a last smirk and raised his glass in mock salute. "Good luck, son," he said, drawing out the word until it dripped with poison. "Maybe you'll get a grant from the city council. I hear they love handing out photo ops." Langston turned away carefully so they wouldn't see the fury burning in his eyes, the embarrassment tightening his throat so hard he could barely swallow. He walked stiffly toward the far end of the room, trying to find another cluster of attendees to approach, but no one seemed eager to meet his eye. He stood there with his name tag glinting under the overhead lights, fighting the urge to rip it off and walk out the door. Around him, people kept drinking and laughing and making deals, as if he wasn't even there. By dawn, he'd forced himself to sit at his tiny kitchen table and draft one more plan. This one was stripped bare, no grand ambitions or green energy retrofits, no mixed-use housing or multi-phase development. Just a single building rehab, a single line of shops, a single promise that it could be done if someone would just lend him enough to break ground. He didn't even ask for $8 million. He didn't even ask for one. He set it at $250,000, the smallest bridge loan he could make work, the leanest budget he'd ever written. So tight it squeaked. He emailed Warren Kincaid's office himself, attaching the new plan, the spreadsheets, the proof of partner commitments for tenant leases, the quotes from contractors willing to honor earlier bids despite the delays. He didn't beg, but his words were polite to the point of humility. "I believe this is a realistic scope for our initial phase," he wrote. "I would be grateful if you would reconsider based on the new model." He waited the entire day for a reply, checking his email so many times he thought his thumb would go numb. Nothing came. He woke up the next morning to the same silence. He waited 3 days, the anxiety in his chest growing heavier. Every unanswered moment like another layer of concrete poured over his hope. When the email finally arrived, it was almost worse than silence. It was 2 sentences long. "Langston, we're not in the business of dreams. Best of luck finding someone who is." Warren hadn't even bothered with a greeting or a signature block. Langston read it 5 times in a row, hoping he'd misunderstood it, that he'd see some shred of constructive feedback he could use. But there was nothing there but the blunt rejection and that smirk he could practically hear in the words. His eyes burned with tired, angry tears that he forced back, too proud to let them fall even in the privacy of his own apartment. He didn't give up even then. He printed the plan out one last time on his aging office printer, walked it back to the bank himself in person, and left it with the receptionist, whose blank stare said she recognized him but didn't care. He waited a week with no call. When he finally pressed for a meeting with Warren, he was told curtly by a junior associate that Mr. Kincaid was not available for informal pitches, and that all inquiries must go through the business loan portal. Langston did it anyway, uploading every document, triple-checking every box. He received the official rejection letter in under 24 hours. It was written on pristine bank letterhead, so polite it felt like a personal insult. It acknowledged receipt of his revised proposal, but cited unacceptable risk parameters and a lack of demonstrated investor readiness. Then, at the bottom, in the section usually reserved for advice on next steps, there was a single line that broke something in him when he read it. "Consider crowdfunding. Maybe your community will care enough to invest." It was signed electronically with Warren Kincaid's name. Langston lowered the letter onto his desk, staring at the words until they blurred in his vision. He felt the rage boil up inside him, uncontainable, something hot and choking in his chest. He wanted to throw the letter, to crumple it and burn it, to run straight back to that gleaming bank and scream in Warren's face until the man understood what he was destroying. But he didn't. He forced the fury down like bile, swallowing until his throat hurt, until his whole body trembled. Because he couldn't afford to lose control. Because he couldn't be the angry black man in the suit shouting in the middle of the bank lobby. Because even as Warren reduced his plan to a joke, Langston knew there were still people depending on him to find another way. The next morning, Langston was in the office early, the cheap coffee maker gurgling in the corner. He spread the rejection letter, the loan proposals, the city letters of support, and every carefully marked up budget and phase plan across the conference table. He didn't bother straightening them. Let them see the mess it had become. When his small team arrived, Tamika with her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, Chris clutching his planner, Marisol carrying 2 cups of coffee they'd pooled tips to buy, they all stopped in the doorway, startled at the sight of Langston waiting for them, arms folded, expression unreadable. He let them come in, let them take it all in, the scattered papers and his cold, determined silence. Then he spoke. "We're done asking for permission," he said, voice low but clear. They exchanged uneasy glances. Chris tried first. "Langston, if this is about the bank rejection." Langston cut him off with a shake of his head. "This is about the truth. I wanted to see if they'd take it seriously, if they'd treat us with respect. And they didn't. And now they're going to see exactly what they lost." He walked around the table, hands clasped behind his back. Tamika frowned. "I don't understand. We're out of options. They won't even let us apply again." Langston turned and looked at her, eyes fierce. "I know," he said evenly. "That's the point." He reached into the pocket of his worn suit jacket and pulled out a slim black folder no one on the team had seen before. He laid it carefully on top of the scattered mess. "This," he said quietly, "is the deal." Marisol blinked. "What deal?" Langston let a smile ghost over his face for the first time in weeks. He opened the folder, revealing a series of signed letters, memoranda of understanding, and term sheets. He pointed to the header at the top of the first page. It read in sleek block letters, "Crenshaw Global Partners, $3.7 billion Urban Revitalization Fund." Chris actually dropped his planner. "Langston," he croaked, voice cracking, "is this real?" Langston nodded slowly. "It's real. It's been real for months." They were ready to sign, but they had one condition. He paused, letting the words sink in. They needed to know if Hawthorne and Chase could be trusted as our banking partner, if they'd treat the project with integrity, if they'd respect the people we're serving. Tamika's eyes widened. They wanted to see the bank's ethics. Langston's mouth twisted into something like a smile, but darker. Exactly. It was a test. And Warren Kincaid failed spectacularly. He let the words hang in the air, heavy and final. Marisol picked up one of the letters with shaking fingers. $3.7 billion, she whispered. "That's the entire corridor. That's housing green energy jobs." Langston nodded. "Without them," he said flatly. "No help from the bank that laughed at us. No fees, no publicity photos. Not a single cent for them to brag about. Just us, our partners, and a global fund that's going to do what they wouldn't even consider." Chris wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "Langston, why didn't you tell us?" Langston's expression softened a little. "Because I had to know. I couldn't let them walk into this and pretend they cared when they were ready to humiliate us in the dirt. Now I know exactly who they are. And so does everyone else." He sat down finally, exhausted but lighter than he'd felt in months. "We're going to announce it today," he said. "Call the press. Call the city council. Call everyone who believed in us. They're going to hear it from us first." He didn't know exactly who had recorded it, but he knew exactly when it had happened. That humiliating gala, the night Warren had singled him out in front of the circle of investors, mocking his vision as a strip mall plan and dismissing it as unworthy of serious investors. The recording picked up Warren's laughter and the sloshing of scotch in his glass. Even worse was the line that would be replayed on social media thousands of times in the coming days. "We don't waste time on social justice startups. Too local for real money." The clip was only a few seconds, but it was all anyone needed to see. Within hours, it was everywhere. Langston watched it once in his office, the grainy quality doing nothing to blunt the cruelty in Warren's smirk or the dismissive way he waved his glass, as if the very idea of investing in the neighborhood was a bad joke. He turned off his phone for a moment and let his team watch it themselves. The room was silent except for the sound of Tamika cursing under her breath, Chris slamming his pen onto the desk so hard it cracked, and Marisol wiping her eyes angrily with the sleeve of her cardigan. When the video ended, Langston exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. "This is what they think of us," he said. "This is what they think of our people, our neighborhoods, our businesses." He let the words sink in. They didn't just say no to our proposal. They said no to us. But if Warren Kincaid had thought he was dealing with someone who would quietly accept the insult and go away, he was wrong. Langston's team spent the rest of the day prepping for a second press event. This time, they weren't just announcing the funding. They were telling the truth about why Hawthorne and Chase wouldn't see a penny of it. The next morning, Langston stood on the steps of City Hall again, facing a sea of microphones and cameras. His tie perfectly knotted despite the tremor in his fingers. He'd barely slept, but as he looked over the crowd, he felt a steady certainty settle into him. He cleared his throat, leaning forward so his voice would carry. Yesterday, I announced that our city will benefit from a $3.7 billion investment in community-driven redevelopment. Today, I want to explain why Hawthorne and Chase Bank will have no role in that plan. Murmurs rippled through the gathered reporters. Flashes went off. Langston's eyes stayed steady. They had every opportunity to participate, to help us rebuild our neighborhoods, to create jobs, to bring hope to communities that have waited too long for real investment. He paused deliberately. They chose to laugh in our faces. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a printed transcript of Warren's words, holding it high so the cameras could zoom in. They called us too local for real money. They dismissed our vision as a social justice startup. They told us to go ask for charity. That's how they see our communities, as charity cases, as jokes. He let the silence that followed stretch painfully until it felt like the entire plaza was holding its breath. Then he continued, voice even lower, forcing everyone to lean in. I want it understood that we don't need banks that don't believe in us. We don't need partners who see us as less. We will build this without them. We will succeed without them. And when our neighborhoods are thriving, they'll know exactly why they were left out. The questions came fast, shouted from every angle. Will you ever work with them again? Have they responded to the video? How do you feel watching that footage? Langston didn't shy away. I feel vindicated, he said clearly, because now the entire city sees what they really are. We're not accepting apologies. We're not negotiating. We're moving forward. By the end of the day, the video had been replayed on every local news channel. The clip of Warren's cruel joke looped endlessly, punctuated by Langston's steady, furious press conference. Community groups called for boycotts. Langston Pryor didn't celebrate the viral video or the cheering crowds outside City Hall, at least not in the way his team did with champagne in cheap plastic cups. He watched them laugh and hug, felt Tamika's arm around his shoulders, heard Chris say over and over that they'd finally won, but he couldn't relax. The truth was he felt too hollow to enjoy it. He knew the fight wasn't over, because even as the city applauded, Hawthorne and Chase Bank still loomed over them, rich and smug and entrenched in power. He knew they would spin it, dismiss it, bury it in corporate language about isolated incidents and misunderstandings. He knew Warren Kincaid was too arrogant to admit he'd lost. But Langston underestimated how fast the reckoning would come once the floodgates opened. The day after his press conference, the video of Warren's sneer and the phrase "too local for real money" had already been shared over 1 million times. Local news led with it. National media picked up. Social media hashtags demanded accountability. Suddenly, people who'd always felt excluded by big banks saw themselves in Langston's story, and they were furious. Inside Hawthorne and Chase, the panic was immediate and all-consuming. Senior partners were dragged out of client meetings to attend emergency strategy calls. Marketing executives scrambled to draft statements condemning Warren's remarks. Public relations consultants billed triple overtime to spit-shine an apology that sounded convincing. But no one could stop the tidal wave. Customers began closing their accounts in protest. Videos went viral of people shredding their debit cards on camera, denouncing the bank's hypocrisy. Local nonprofits publicly severed partnerships. One by one, major corporate clients issued terse statements saying they would review their banking relationships. Behind closed doors, the bank's largest institutional investors began threatening to pull their funds if the board didn't take swift and decisive action. Warren Kincaid himself tried to weather it at first, showing up in the executive suite with the same smug expression, dismissing the uproar as a social media fad that would blow over. He called Langston's press conference a sideshow. He joked to colleagues that these people will calm down once the next outrage pops up. But the boardroom was silent. No one laughed. By the third day, Hawthorne and Chase's stock price had dropped 10%, then 15%, then 20%. Shareholders panicked. Analysts predicted the loss of key government contracts that required compliance with anti-discrimination rules. Investors went on television demanding answers. The board met in an emergency, closed-door session. Warren wasn't invited until the last hour, when they called him in like a defendant waiting for sentencing. He tried to charm them with his easy grin. He claimed he was being taken out of context. He said he had always been loyal to the bank, always protected its reputation, always kept bad bets out of their portfolio. He even blamed Langston for baiting him with an unrealistic plan. But the room was ice. The chair of the board, an old man in an even older suit, listened to Warren's rant in silence before leaning forward and speaking so softly Warren had to stop talking to hear him. "You're not an asset anymore," the chair said. "You're a liability." He nodded to security. Warren went red, then pale. The guard gestured for him to stand. He didn't fight. He just picked up his briefcase with shaking hands and let them walk him out. The board released a statement that afternoon. Effective immediately, Warren Kincaid is no longer employed with Hawthorne and Chase Bank. We apologize unreservedly for the unacceptable language and discriminatory practices that have come to light. We are committed to change. But it wasn't enough to stop the bleeding. Regulators had already seen the video. They'd seen the transcript of Langston's speech at City Hall. They saw the hashtags calling for federal investigations. They received letters from civil rights groups, from state senators, from city council members who wanted the bank held accountable. Within a week, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency announced a formal investigation into Hawthorne and Chase's lending practices. They cited evidence of systemic bias and discriminatory redlining tactics, specifically naming the internal flags like high-risk urban exposure that Warren had used to sabotage Langston's proposal. Langston's name was mentioned in the first paragraph of the regulator's press release. He read it sitting in the same battered chair in his small office, the smell of stale coffee in the air, the rejected loan papers still in a box on the floor. He felt the tremor in his hands. It wasn't joy exactly. It was something sharper, more complicated. It was justice, and it hurt a little because of how hard it had been to get there. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted quotes. Community leaders wanted to meet. His team wanted to celebrate. Langston just sat for a moment, breathing, trying to accept that they had really done it, that they had exposed the bank's lie, forced it into the daylight, and made sure the people in power couldn't ignore it any longer. Langston Pryor sat alone in the office long after the last of his team had gone home for the night. The hum of the old radiator in the corner and the glow of the streetlights outside the window, the only signs that time was even passing. The headlines on his computer screen felt unreal. Hawthorne and Chase Bank under federal investigation. Former bank exec fired amid racism scandal. City approves $3.7 billion urban revitalization project led by local visionary. Each headline felt like both a victory and a heavy weight. It was vindication, but it had come at the cost of being humiliated over and over, at the cost of watching partners flinch and abandon him when it mattered most. He hadn't just exposed Warren Kincaid. He'd exposed a whole system that had taught men like Warren that contempt was normal, that mockery was strategy, that community investment was a punchline. Langston scrolled past the newest video making the rounds, pausing on the thumbnail before clicking play. It showed Warren sitting at a desk in a different kind of office, cheaper, smaller, no mahogany shelves or panoramic views. The camera close enough to catch the sweat on his hairline. Warren's shoulders were slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. He didn't look like the man who had once smirked at Langston and waved him out of the bank with a flick of his fingers. He looked like someone who had been forcibly introduced to his own ugliness. The video had been posted to the bank's official channel and shared everywhere. It was their last-ditch attempt at damage control, but it was also more than that. Warren cleared his throat in the video, voice cracking. "I want to apologize," he said, staring directly into the camera with a dull, defeated gaze. "Not just to Langston Pryor, but to the entire community. My words were wrong. My attitude was wrong. I failed to see the potential in people who deserved my respect. I dismissed an idea that would help thousands because of my own prejudice. I was arrogant. I was cruel. And I'm sorry." He swallowed, hard enough that the microphone picked up the sound. "I understand now that what I did wasn't just about rejecting a proposal. It was about rejecting people. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope I can make amends." Langston watched the whole thing, without moving, without blinking, the memory of those meetings in Warren's office still so clear, the flickering lights of the broom closet conference room, the laughter as Warren called his plan a charity bake sale, the final insult in that rejection letter telling him to try crowdfunding. He didn't smile. He didn't feel triumph. He just felt tired. He closed the video. It was something, at least. Not enough, but something. 2 weeks later, Langston stood in front of a different camera. This one set up in the bright, freshly painted offices of the new Financial Literacy and Small Business Empowerment Center. His team sat behind him, the walls lined with donated books about economics, entrepreneurship, law. This center had been his dream long before he'd ever thought about a billion-dollar redevelopment plan. It was for the people who wouldn't even think to walk into a big bank, who had been laughed at or turned away or given rates that guaranteed failure. It was for teaching the skills no one bothered to teach them. Langston cleared his throat, looking at the small crowd of local reporters, community leaders, and business owners packed shoulder to shoulder in the space. He gestured to the sign behind him, newly hung and still smelling of fresh varnish. "This place is for us," he said. "It's for everyone who was told their dreams were too local. It's for everyone who heard no and thought that meant they weren't good enough. It's for everyone who was taught to aim smaller because someone else decided they didn't belong." He let the words settle before continuing, voice steady. "I want to announce our first hire." Murmurs rippled through the room. He took a breath. "I offered Warren Kincaid a job here." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Langston felt his heart beating like a drum in his ribs. He didn't flinch. "I didn't do it because I owe him anything. I didn't do it because he deserves it. I did it because he has something to teach. He's going to run our workshops on systemic bias in lending. He's going to stand in front of this community and explain exactly how discrimination works from the inside. He's going to tell them what it looks like, what words they use to hide it, how to see it coming, how to fight it." A reporter finally found her voice. "Do you really trust him?" Langston's eyes didn't waver. "I don't have to trust him. That's the point. He can't undo what he did, but he can help make sure it doesn't happen again. That's how you change a system from both sides, by forcing it to tell the truth." He ended the conference to the sound of hesitant applause that grew louder as the idea sank in. People shook his hand as they left, some hugging him, some thanking him with tears in their eyes. Warren Kincaid arrived later that day, head down, clutching a folder like it was a lifeline. He didn't meet Langston's gaze at first. When he finally did, his eyes were haunted but grateful. Langston nodded once, cold but resolute, before turning to show him where he'd be working. They walked the halls of the center in silence, two men who had once been enemy and victim, now forced to occupy the same space. For Langston, it wasn't forgiveness. It was accountability. It was justice served in the only way that would mean anything. It was the start of something better, not perfect, but necessary the end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. I'd love to hear what you think about this plot. Did the twist surprise you? Did the ending feel satisfying? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel. Let's talk about it below.